Thank you so much, Val, and thank you all for being here. This is reminding me of some of my experiences. I spent a year in Siberia when I was in my early 20s. I was helping to start youth dance groups. And frequently we would, I would go around and invite everyone. You have to come. It's so important. You can't practice a group dance without the group there. And after a week of waiting and inviting, we'd have a rehearsal, and 2 people would show up an hour and a half late. So after this happened a few times, I had a lot of existential angst about it. I'm failing. This is horrible. And finally, I realized whoever is there are the people who are supposed to be there, and they're the people we are going to work with love and positive energy. So I'm thrilled to see all of you here tonight, and I hope this can be a positive experience for all of us. I wanted to start by acknowledging or expressing my appreciation for being on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples and the Wasena, Chisangis, and Esquimalt nations. And I'm just learning a little bit about the history of this region, but I am very grateful to be here and appreciate their stewardship for so many thousands of years of this beautiful land. As I'm sure all of you know, there are some very strong limitations to talking about parenting, because parenting may be one of the hardest things to do. So I would like to acknowledge my own limitations as a parent to start, and say that I hope this can be something that everyone can take something from. No one is a perfect parent, and I think we're also all in progress. So I'm hoping that everyone can take away at least one idea, one thing to ponder or consider that may be helpful for you in whatever parenting role you may play. Because again, parenthood can be understood in so many different ways, and I hope you can all take whatever applies to whatever role of leadership or guidance you might find yourself in. Parents do need encouragement and support, and I hope this can play a role in that. So as Val said, today is going to be mainly fairly interactive. I do have some slides. They're mainly just to keep me focused. And you'll see there is some paper, and there should be a few pens on the table. I'm hoping you'll take the opportunity to take notes if you'd like. And I have about 4 to 6 discussion questions that I will, at periodic places throughout the workshop, turn to you and ask you to discuss in your small groups. Please feel free to share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. I don't want anyone to feel that they need to open up their soul unless you actually really want to. So whatever is comfortable for you in terms of self-disclosure. And there are about 4 major sections I'm going to go through tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about what virtues are. Then I'm going to go through 3 major aspects in some of the thinking I've been doing about how virtues apply to parenting. Our own development as individuals, how we construct ourselves as parents, and then how we actually directly may teach virtues to children or youth. So let's start with, what are virtues? I'd like to acknowledge the work of Linda and Dan Popoff and John Cavillin. Many of you may have seen this book, which I've seen at Russell Books, actually out in front, if anyone's interested in a copy. They've worked for decades on trying to bring the language of virtues more into the common realm, and it's now being used a lot more in schools and other venues. So I was talking with my mom about it tonight, and she was mentioning that back when I was growing up, this wasn't as common. And I think understanding that virtues is a language that we can all use is a lot more understood today, thanks in part to their work. There are many ways of understanding what virtues are. I have a few metaphors or concepts up here that may be useful for some of you. One way to understand them is as universal spiritual truths. So these are realities in the same way that scientific laws are realities. And they can be found in many religious traditions, in spiritual traditions, in 12-step programs, all of which reflect the same underlying concepts. Another way some people look at virtues is as attributes of God. So these might be the names or characteristics of that great source, again, however you understand that great source, that reflect part of that primal energy that created or gave life to the rest of the universe and all of us. Another way some people look at virtues is as building blocks of character. They are some of the core foundations that create who we are as people, and hopefully create us in a strong, healthy, positive way. Another metaphor that worked for me were soul muscles, that virtues are the tools by which we're able to get things done, and they also taking the muscle metaphor a little bit farther, if you don't mind, there are things that we need to work on to make strong and that we need to continually use so that they remain healthy and viable. Virtues can have many other names. I like the name virtue because for me it speaks to something of the universal nature of them, that these aren't bound but to any one culture, but they really transcend cultures. Now, why do virtues matter in parenting? I think there are a few reasons why. One is that we as parents are models. We all know this. It can be really hard to internalize, but our actions truly are the bulk of the way people learn about us and the way especially children learn about the world. So practicing virtues is one of the best ways that we're actually able to teach our children how to be good people. They're also at the heart of how most people want to raise their children. We want to raise children who are generous, who are brave, who are kind. And so it just makes sense that that becomes a central piece of what we're talking about in our parenting. You know, bedtime is important, doing homework is important, being active in sports, learning the piano, these are all important things. But the core of what many people think of in terms of success, when they strip away some of the more material assumptions, is to be a good person with the ability to speak, the ability to live your life, to take charge of your life in a positive manner. So those are the virtues. Virtues can also provide a positive direction for the development of a child's innate attributes. Many of you have heard the example of a child who wants everything, just so eager to eat all the dessert and to play well past bedtime and to have every toy. This impulse, this desire, could turn into greed, or it could also turn into enthusiasm and a zest for life, simply depending on the angle you put on it and the direction in which you help that child develop. Just a couple other aspects to why I think virtues are relevant in the context of parenting. One is that they do inspire us. The stories about bravery, stories about acts of sacrifice and extreme kindness, of love that transforms people, these awaken something inside us. They move us to tears. They make us want to be better and to do more and do better. And that inspiration is a major force for helping us move and grow and change, in the same way it can help our children. And finally, or firstly, depending on the priority you might place on this, virtues can help connect us with a spiritual or religious tradition that can ground us and provide patterns of behavior, patterns of action in our daily lives. There really is an endless number of virtues, and some of them are more closely related than others. Some of them are... Anyhow, it's fascinating the way these interact. And some of them are expressed differently in different traditions, but are elements of some core spiritual truths. There are a few characteristics of virtues, as I was thinking of them, that I found really interesting in terms of how we use them in parenting. One of them is that I believe virtues are expansive. They're not just a word. They're a deep, rich spiritual concept that requires really years to understand. You need stories about a virtue. You need practicing it in different circumstances to really have a true understanding of what it means. And I think this is a wonderful thing to keep in mind. We can often think that we know what these things mean. We know what it means to be generous. So we tell our child, be generous, share your toys. That may be one aspect of generosity, but what really is generosity, and what does it look like in that context for a little child who may just be getting used to the idea of separating from a parent and separating from an object that is mine? So as our understanding grows of these virtues, we're able to, I think, apply them more meaningfully. And as we engage our children in these discussions, they're able to understand them on a deeper basis. So I think the expansive concept, the expansive aspect of virtues pushes us to continually expand our own understanding. And I think it prevents us from really being dogmatic in the way we apply the virtues. Another aspect is that virtues are interactive. You can't just pick one virtue and say, this is my virtue. I am generous. And that's the only virtue I have and the only one I'm going to work on. If you were generous and you weren't anything else, there could be a problem. You might be so generous, you start giving away other people's things. You might be so generous, you forget to take care of yourself and you lose your integrity because you're giving away stuff that you need to actually manage your own concerns. Any of these virtues taken in isolation is going to be a problem. So the virtues always need to be understood in the milieu of all the virtues together, because they do modify each other. And there are some examples of, ones that work better, like honesty with courtesy. Pure honesty but no courtesy, not so good, and vice versa, also not so good. A third aspect of virtues, which again I think has relevance for how we use them as parents, is that they are generative. So I use that word to mean they unleash energy, because I believe they are tapping into, and again this is my understanding, they are tapping into these universal truths that are true whether you're tuned into them or not. So as you start to think about these concepts, as you start to practice them, it does release energy, and it releases energy in you and in those with whom you're using that virtue. So again, I'm sure we've all had this experience, you're having a difficult day and someone shows you an unusual measure of understanding or of love or does an exceptionally caring gesture towards you, and it starts to change you, and then your change will affect the other people you interact with. So keeping that in mind, to me, is just simply inspiration to continue to focus on how I practice these in my life, and keep in mind that they can transform a family and an individual if they are applied. So I'd like to talk about now, that was the introduction, what are virtues? Now we're going to move on to 3 aspects of using the virtues as a parent. So the first aspect I would say is studying and growing in the virtues yourself. So it starts with you. You can't just say, oh, virtues, I'm going to start teaching my kid the virtues, until you actually do the work yourself. The second one is using virtues to guide how you interact with your child. So first you develop yourself. Then you think about how that affects how you treat your child, how you behave in interaction with your child. And then the third stage, I would say, is that the virtues can be a method or something that you directly teach to your child, that builds on the foundation of yourself working on these virtues, and these virtues infusing the way you're interacting with your children. And just to build a little bit on that, it also, again, as you engage with the virtues, your understanding of them is also going to grow and expand. So you're not only better able to use the language automatically, but your understanding of what it means to be truthful, to be patient or generous, is a lot deeper. So again, you're not simply saying be generous, you're talking about what does generosity look like, and you're able to understand some of the ways a child might be thinking about generosity at any point in time. Part of the reason I think the personal practice is important to me is part of my understanding about the purpose of life, and I think this reflects some of the concepts that you've talked about. That I believe we do have a dual purpose to grow our souls or develop those virtues and be of service. And again, the virtues help us in doing both of these things. That we were created noble, so that we are meant to be wonderful creatures, and virtues are an amazing vehicle to do that. That we are educated to reveal our internal gems. And again, it's like these virtues are potential within us. So we're meant to draw them out and to educate ourselves within the family, within various learning environments, to be able to develop and show them. And that we have responsibility for our own development. So this goes a little bit to some of the aspects of parenting, in that you can't develop generosity on behalf of your child. You have to help your child develop that quality for themselves in a way that makes sense for them. And also that you need to own your own responsibility for that personal development. Another one, that we are responsible to bring ourselves to account. Some people, it might be every day, every year, but at some point you have to look in the mirror and say, this is who I am. And the virtues can be a really effective checklist or tool for saying, how did I do on patience today? Maybe especially as parents, how did I do on patience today? Or respect, or some of these other things. One of the quotes I wanted to just share, the gem quote again from Baha'u'llah, that I find really valuable to regard a man or humans as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value, and that education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable us to benefit from those treasures. This to me speaks both to the capacity we have ourselves to grow and develop the virtues that are inherent within us, and also our responsibility as educators of children, because parents are these primary educators, to help our children do that same thing. So we're going to move on to, that was the first aspect, how developing these virtues yourself in terms of how virtues applies to parenting. The second aspect is what approach to parenting can be useful can be most useful if you're trying to apply the virtues. And I'm just going to say a few words and then talk a little bit about a few parenting styles. I read a lot about parenting. I'm so not an expert, but I'm a little obsessed with reading about parenting. And there are a few things that have come to mind as I've done some of that reading. Hello to my lovely spouse over there. First is that virtues, the language of virtues is very important, that it becomes something that you're comfortable with, so you're able to understand it on a level that you can see what's going on, and you can use it in conversation and guiding your children. But just the language alone is not going to lead to transformation. You can't simply plop a vocabulary into a non-functioning mode of parenting and expect that to completely transform things. It may help, because I do believe the words have power, but it's not adequate. And there are two reasons for that, I believe. The first one, I think, is modeling, as has been mentioned by a number of people so far. Your actions and behavior are one of the most significant ways that children and youth are going to learn about the world. So the way you behave, if you're living in accordance with the virtues or not, treating your child in accordance with the virtues or not, is going to be largely how they understand things. So again, we've all done this. Yelling, be patient, don't yell, not being generous with our children, or giving them the benefit of the doubt in the same way we might give ourselves. There are many ways in which we may treat children differently from the way they deserve to be treated, and differently from the way we would treat other humans. And that ineffective modeling creates real discrepancies for the kids, makes it really hard for them to grasp what the virtues are if they're being told one thing and yet experiencing the world quite differently. There's a second reason, and this goes more to some of the reading I'm sure many of you have done on parenting, that relates to child's brain development and relationship. And I've read a fair bit of the attachment parenting literature. I'm not sure if anyone else here has. But essentially, that talks about one of the most important things for a child is their relationship or connection with the adults who are their main caregivers or their main guides. And the health and strength of that relationship, that it's positive, it's loving, it's nurturing, it provides a safe environment for them, is essential for their emotional well-being and their intellectual, emotional, physical development, every aspect of their development. That relationship is what enables the parent to be a guide and to be a coach. Because when that authority figure is loving, is caring, is listening to you, is respectful, you can trust them. When that trust relationship exists, you're willing to follow them. That's actually the core of discipline, is you establish such a strong positive relationship that your child knows, or a youth that you're working with as a coach knows that they can trust you, and therefore they are willing and able to follow you and follow your guidance. When you establish that loving, trusting relationship, then sharing about the virtues makes sense. You're not imposing them, you're talking about them. You're providing guidance that they know they can trust and they know they can rely on and they know is going to keep them safe. So again, you can parent. There are many ways of parenting, but this core of what that relationship is, I think really creates an environment where it's much more possible for those virtues to be a transformative aspect of how you're working with them. one other aspect of that is when you're in a feeling safe and secure, when you're in a stable environment, when you know you don't have to worry about your safety and well-being, your brain is a lot more ready to learn. You know, when you're in an unstable environment, your forebrain retreats. You're not functioning in the same way, and so you're not really able to learn and process, and you're a lot more reliant on your instincts. If we want our children to get good at the virtues, we need to enable them to be in the brain space where they're practicing those virtues as much and effectively as possible. So they need to be in a safe place, in a loving environment, so that their brains are able to absorb the virtues and practice them. Because whatever you practice is what you get good at. So we want them to be practicing these things. So we want them to be in a safe environment so that they're doing it, they're using the virtues as much as possible. We're right there beside them, helping them, so that it starts to become just what they do, what they practice and they know, and it becomes their fallback too. So with that being said, I wanted to look quickly at 3 parenting styles. Diana Baumrind spent a lot of time studying parenting styles, and these have been largely validated through the research that people have done. Now again, I want to emphasize there are many ways to parent, and there are many nuances on these. So I'm not trying to say this is the right way to do it. I'm just want to share some of my understanding of some ways that may be more or less helpful. So at the top, we've got the authoritarian or domineering style. This is a style that is more focused on control. Essentially, the parent is in charge, the child must follow and obey. There's very little leeway, there's not really dialogue. There can be a lot of essentially control and management of a child, getting them to do what you need to do, what you want them to do when you want them to do it. Some of the impacts of this, as you can imagine, are conflicts, a lack of internalized motivation, because again, a child isn't choosing what to do, a child is being made to do things. There can be a lack of self-control that develops, because again, a child isn't using his or her own self-control, the child is being made to do things. So they're never having to exercise their own willpower in making those choices. Second style is the permissive style on the left-hand side over there. This sometimes is also referred to maybe as democratic parenting. Essentially, children are able to do whatever they want. There's no controls placed on them. Their opinion has equal weight to the parents. This was a bit of a reaction to the authoritarian style. Well, of course, we want our kids to have a voice. But when they have an equal voice to their parents and the parents set no limits on what they can do, the result is actually a loss of control and a loss of a sense of security, because the security comes from having a framework within which to operate. The third style that has been found to be effective is somewhere in what's called authoritative, or a guiding parental style, or a coaching parental style. This is where the parent is in charge, but there is communication. A child's thoughts and wishes are respected. They're understood to be part of how the child is developing. They're solicited and considered. So a parent provides guidance, but is willing to listen if a child says, no, that really doesn't work for me. Maybe the parent still says, well, we need to do this. But then the parent says, so how can we work with you to make this happen? The parent, in relation to virtues, the parent is coaching the child in how to express those virtues, rather than just saying, this is what the virtue is, you have to do it. Excuse me. Children that are parented in this general style have been found to be cooperative, self-reliant, energetic, and friendly. It's simply because they know what they can do and what they can't do, and they know that they're being heard. And it's been found to have really positive results. So we're going to move on to the third aspect, and we have a few minutes just to talk about this. So we've talked about our development as individuals with respect to the virtues, so our own personal growth and development. We've talked a little bit about parenting styles and the ways in which different parenting styles may be more or less suited for really helping the kids we work with develop their virtues. Now we're going to talk about ways in which you might directly engage with children in teaching them about the virtues, coaching them on the virtues. And I have just a few thoughts I'd like to share, again, from some of my reading. I may read too much, but from some of my reading that I think sets the context within which I think some of this can be done more effectively. And a lot of this, I think, would fall within the guiding, coaching, authoritative style of parenting. So I'll just put these up to talk about. First of all, to connect first and then talk. So again, just parachuting in, from the corner, be generous. Try communicating. Like it often, whoosh, whoosh, flies over the child's head. When you make that connection, it's often through eye contact, getting down on their level, through a touch. Sometimes if they've been in a really difficult situation, it might be, through some physical contact, talking about something else, helping them calm down, but making the connection so they know you're there and you know they're there before you actually start talking about what you need to talk about. Whether that's time to brush your teeth, or what happened in that fight you had with your friend, whatever it might be. A second thing I think that can be useful is to keep a positive focus. So rather than focusing on what they don't have, focus on what they might develop. So even if it's a question of you weren't very patient there. Maybe there are times that might work, but however you can frame it as what they're trying to develop. Or instead of, wow, you want to acknowledge the feelings, wow, you were angry. It sounded like you had a really hard time keeping your cool, or really hard time listening and respecting what your friend was trying to tell you. Like however you can, again, bring that language in and frame it in a positive manner can help the child start to see it in that positively framed manner. Another one is to discuss rather than impose. I really think, again, our own spiritual development is our own personal development is our own, and this is for children too. They are their own unique persons, and we're here to help them do that work. So if you tell them you should be this virtue, sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it's more useful to help them think about what happened. Can you ask questions to help them dig out what went wrong? What do you think you could have done that would have been helpful? How are you feeling? And what do you think was needed in that situation? At least, maybe they won't have an answer and maybe you can share what you have to offer, but at least when you're talking about it rather than imposing, they're engaged with it. And it might be somewhere in there that they bring it up. And when you bring it up yourself, you're more likely to own it. Another aspect is being honest. I think it can be really easy to latch onto the virtues and just use them as praise. Wow, you're so kind, you're so generous, you're so blah, blah, blah. And occasionally that's super great. And sometimes, first of all, if it's not, you're the most patient person in the world, they're probably not. Let your positive comments be honest. Like, wow, I saw you really practicing more patience there than I've seen you do before. That might be a much more honest assessment of it than, wow, you are super patient. So let your feedback on it be as honest as you can, because I think it reflects the expansive nature of the virtues and lets the kids grow into it. And be specific. So again, not you're so patient, but I saw that when your little cousin took your toy, that you managed to take some breaths and not get upset. You really used a lot of patience and not freaking out in that situation, or whatever words might be appropriate to use at that time. The more specific you are, the more they're able to really identify what exactly happened, because you want them to know what exactly happened, so that they're able to remember and then build on that into the future. And I've got make requests, and I wrote down also don't ask. Sort of two opposite concepts, but I think it can be helpful if you're struggling with something your child is doing, to simply ask them. I would really appreciate it if you could use a little more humility when you talk about your achievements at school, because I think I can't think of where to take that example further. Or, for example, if you could use more positivity in talking about what's going to happen at the family dinner, because it's really hurting my feelings when I hear you're this upset about what might happen. Like, you can make a direct request to your child, framed positively, about the virtues you'd like to see them have. And the flip side is, I don't think you always need to ask. I think I think you can expect, it's not, will you please come to the table? Will you please be patient? You expect them to be patient. You expect them to live up to the virtues. And of course you're not dictating what your kids do, but I think that expectation of, yes, they can do this is it can be a really useful attitude to take forward. All right, I'm noticing the time. So there was one more thing, which I don't think we have time to do, but I'll just show you what it is. And you're welcome to take home a sheet if you'd like. I had some wording for virtues that were used in somewhat problematic ways. If we had more time, we could do this as a group at your table, rewording these into positive statements. Like, how would you take that situation and put it in a positive framework? But I'm thinking we may be running out of time. So what I'd like to go to is thinking about some ways in which you might actually approach this in your family. So we've talked about a few of them, and I just want to highlight some of them and give you a few minutes then at your table, both to identify any way that you might bring the virtues into your family or the work you do more clearly, and any idea you might like to take with you from tonight. So some of the ideas I've seen about how you might bring the virtues into your work more clearly, I'll just move on to the next slide, are mainstreaming the language of virtues. So simply using that language more frequently. Identifying a core group of virtues, either for yourself or for your family, you might want to work on. Because again, if you have a list of 50 virtues, it's going to be really hard to figure out what those all mean, and it'll end up being just a word rather than a meaningful concept. So picking a few that really might be at the core of what you'd like to focus on for a period of time anyways. Encouraging self-identification of the virtues. So again, I don't think it's our job to it's great to acknowledge virtues, and I also think it's really good to help kids acknowledge their own virtues. Like, wow, what virtue did you practice there? So that they're able to really own it and see it for themselves. And our acknowledgement can help, and doing it themselves can help. Making the virtues visible, simply having the words up in a way that they can be seen. And finding times and spaces to talk about them, whether it's around the dinner table, as you were referring to, at bedtime, in a weekly family meeting. What are the environments in which it's useful to do that? All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a good evening.